On behalf of the Country School Class of 2024, welcome to this Witness Stones installation ceremony to honor the life and contributions of Tommy, a man who was enslaved here at the Deacon John Grave House. During the course of the next hour or so, we will share what we have learned through our archival research.
Tommy's life was a significant part of history and the Guilford community, and it shows us what enslaved people had to go through every day. His story deserves to be told.
My name is Jamoke McDuffie Thurmond, and I'm a poet. I came in to lead a presentation and some poetry workshops in relation to the ways in which they're working with these primary sources, these documents that I refer to as archives of enslavement, so ledgers, wills, bills of sale, and thinking about how you look beyond what is in the text to excavate and attend to some of the lives of the people who are held within that.
You were a mason. You were a builder. You were a constructor. You were a foundation of Guilford. But were you a poet? Were you an artist?
There were so many ways in which enslaved Africans, enslaved Black people in this country insisted upon and asserted their humanity, right? So as we're talking about this and learning about this, making sure that we don't lose sight of that.
From Connecticut Public, this is Unforgotten, Connecticut's Hidden History of Slavery. I'm Diane Orson.
And I'm Frank Mitchell.
When we think of slavery in the U.S., we don't often think of the North.
Enslavement happened here and has deep roots in Connecticut and across New England.
In this series, we'll hear stories about recovering this history.
And we talk about some of the issues in and around these stories.
Before we go to our fifth story, let's hear from a student in Madison.
My name is Maybelline Hladky. I'm 13 years old, and I'm in 8th grade at the country school. I chose to write a poem because I feel that it really describes, not what Tommy went through, but, how much we don't know about his life. And I asked the questions in my poem, were you a poet? Did you sing songs? Because there's so many things that we don't know about him. We only know the facts. We don't know, who he was as a person and what he enjoyed doing. Learning about hard history is difficult, and learning what people went through in this time and how terrible it was for Tommy. But as I started researching, I just wanted to learn more and more and more. And it was hard to learn about him, but it was good in the end.
Tommy's Secrets. 1682. This is the year you arrived, and your story started. Like the beginning of a book, but it has secrets that only the author knows. You were a mason. You were a builder. You were a constructor. You were a foundation of Guilford. But were you a poet? Were you an artist? Noadiah. Did he work with you? Did you know him? 1707. This is the year you disappeared. Like the end of a story, but only the author knows what happens next. We don't know where you went or how your life was after that year. Did you run away? Were you too old to work? There are many events in your life we will never figure out. Those are your secrets to keep. How you came to the grave house, who you knew and loved. If you told stories, if you sang songs. These secrets, these stories, these songs will always and forever be yours.
So the poem is a really amazing commemoration. The process is also a beautiful sort of memorialization. The students working together, conducting their own research, and then creating some art inspired by what they find is in some ways as moving memorial to this history and to these people's lives as anything you could imagine. And hopefully from this experience, they'll begin to wrestle with sort of the ethics of some of these larger questions and move us forward along those questions.
Let's go to our story. Then we'll talk some more. I visited 3 Connecticut communities where students were chronicling stories of slavery right where they live. And they talked about why what happened then matters now. New Haven Harbor in the late 1790s. The ship Neptune set sail on an ambitious expedition. The crew would journey to the Far East to trade sealskins for silk and tea. A lot's been written about this voyage, but not about the enslaved men aboard the Neptune.
Dick Bristol was originally a slave in Hamden. He got sold to a man named Daniel Green, a slave owner in New Haven, and Daniel Green wanted to go on this expedition.
I'm sitting with 15-year-old Jason Thomas at James Hill House High School in New Haven. His history class studied ship logs and archival documents to help piece together, for the first time, the story of Dick Bristol.
Dick's conditional promise of freedom was that if he went on this trip about 3 to 4 years, then he would have been free. Dick agreed. After about a year, he was like, I can't do this anymore. They're treating me worse than they did in New Haven. So he saw the ship. It was only about a football field away. He didn't know how to swim, but he jumped off the ship and he tried to swim over there.
And no one knows what happened to Dick Bristol after that. Students at Hill House worked with researchers from the Witness Stones Project to uncover this story. It's one of several initiatives in Connecticut working with local schools and civic institutions to help communities recover their history and honor lives of the enslaved.
When we brought this out to light, suddenly it shows this whole new aspect of what the Neptune was and how they achieved their goal.
Talk to me about what working on the Witness Stones project has meant for you.
It allows me to understand things that I had not understood before as a Black person myself. Once I understand my history and I understand my background and I understand the background of those around me, I think it allows me to be a better person and be more of myself.
Adrienne Joy Burns is a public historian with the Witness Stones. Public historians do important primary research outside of the university's setting. She says when students really engage with history, they see the world differently.
Because it tells us about how we get to the present, how history is made, why things are voted on today the way they are.
Dennis Culleton is Witness Stone's executive director and a former middle school history teacher.
One of the biggest issues we have, I think, in our society is thinking of the other and who is the other? What if the other is us? What if we're the same? We want kids to close their eyes and think of colonial Connecticut, colonial America as a place where many people are contributing, not just people with certain last names and from certain heritages.
Each project centers on one enslaved person and culminates with the installation of a small bronze plaque at a site where the person lived, worked, or worshipped. Last December, I went to a ceremony in the town of Madison. We're inside an historic home where several people were enslaved, the Deacon John Grave House. In the late 1600s, the Grave family purchased a carpenter named Tommy and kept an account book listing money they earned by renting him to neighbors. Students from the nearby country school studied the account book. 14-year-old Henrik Sharp says he knows some people will shy away from learning this hard history.
Because they can't imagine this actually happening, but this stuff did happen. It was awful, it did happen, it was real.
It was also kind of relieved that we were actually going to talk about this stuff.
This experience led 14-year-old Abby Calarco to think about their own family story.
My dad has light skin and my mom has dark skin, so I think it was always very important to me about where I came from. And now I'm wondering if there were any of my ancestors around here, maybe even in this house. I think that it's possible.
In some towns, poet Jamoke McDuffie Thurmond is brought in to work with students. He asked the students in Madison to think about the gap between dry historical documents and a person's inner humanity.
These documents do not have a monopoly on truth, and really important for younger folks, especially for children who are learning about slavery and the legacy and afterlives of slavery, to resist this idea that people were property, right? People were people who were treated as property, but there were so many ways in which enslaved Black people in this country insisted upon and asserted their humanity.
20 miles away in the town of Wallingford, students have been researching another enslaved person. Sister and brother Evelyn and John Reach, 16 and 18 years old, were introduced to the Witness Stones Project in middle school and helped bring it to Choate Rosemary Hall.
In order to research a young girl that we had discovered was previously enslaved on the Choate campus itself, named Lettice.
We know that Lettice was a 6-year-old girl when she died. She was also baptized I think 3 months before her
Death record.
her death record,
Yeah.
which we think may indicate that she was sick.
And that they knew she was going to die, so they baptized her. We weren't able to find as many documents on Lettice, but we were able to find a lot more of documentation on the Atwater family who had been her enslavers.
So we're sitting on the Choate campus, just steps away from where Lettice was enslaved. Can you talk about that?
I'd say it's really impactful to just think about what might have occurred. Like, would she have played in the woods nearby?
Uncovering a past this close, he says, makes it real.
It takes history and it narrows it down to a point of just one life. And I think that's powerful because it makes it personal and it makes it meaningful.
Learning about Connecticut's hidden history of slavery inspired John Reach to write a poem. Here's how it ends. Our forgotten are to be remembered. They are eternal in time and history, but only if there is history. I pick up a pen, an unending journey rises from the resting dust.
I appreciate their wrestling with the ethics of all this. I think they will push us to the next place in this conversation. If we're notifying families that we've recovered their ancestors who were enslaved, are we also notifying families whose ancestors were enslavers? What are the other big questions and things we should be wrestling with around this work? And I think having students involved at this level will push us to get to the place where we need to be.
Mm-hmm. Frank, you work in public humanities and you're an editorial consultant for this series. Let's talk about memorialization, which came up in this story. I'm interested in your vision for the kind of memorialization that helps us move forward.
Sure. I appreciate the ways that Witness Stones is changing the landscape of Connecticut with the plaques that they have produced for lots of towns at this point, and the ways that they've worked with young people to do that is really impressive. We're seeing change to our built environment that tells a different story. We have a chance to do more of that. I believe the 250th, the big anniversary coming up, which will be celebrating our nation, is another opportunity to do some of that work. There are some great exhibitions that are coming online over the next few months that are also helping us to think about how these stories move from the occasional into the everyday and how we see them all over as opposed to for 3 months in one gallery and then they disappear. And I think that really is the challenge for us, is making sure they become part of daily life in a lot of different places. There's that element of redundancy in how we talk about this history and how we see it in music that's played in churches, in our restaurants, in a room named for a certain figure or a person or an episode, on our highways, in all those kind of mundane places, but places that really do remind us of who lived here and the kind of work they did, in addition to monuments and plaques and the kinds of things that stand out for a while. But it's also in who's in the post office, who gets a street name for them, all that kind of.
Right. We're going to go back now to students, and we're going to listen to Evelyn Reach in Wallingford, who wrote a poem called The Stone. This was in response to her research into the life of Lettice, who was enslaved on what is now the Choate campus where Evelyn is at school.
The stone came today. The bronze held black letters spelling out her name, Lettice. I offered to carry it. It was so much heavier than I could have imagined, concrete and bronze no bigger than my palm. Its material was solid and hard and strong, but it still seemed so fragile. Fragile as a life, curling feathers of softness shimmering like dark ink across the page, cool to the touch. I was afraid to disturb it. The stone was heavy, but a comforting weight, like I was holding a slumbering child. Leaning against the fence, looking at the fresh green grass, I resisted the urge to lean my arms against the rough wood of the fence. It seemed wrong to rest against the weight. The heat was suffocating, but I would not move to jostle her stone in my arms. The stone was a soft and cool presence of concrete. Bubbles were strewn across the bronze face. She might have had such enthusiasm as young children do, running around the yard, humming an irregular beat of happiness. But was she free to do these things that bring 6-year-olds joy? I held Letitia's stone on top of the brown and red paper bag from R.J. Julia's that Ms. Lightfoot carried it in as we walked back. They thanked me for carrying it. I said it was an honor.
Frank, I want to come back and talk with you a little bit more about the type of work you do, consulting with museums on issues of marginalized peoples and histories that we rarely hear about. Can you give me a couple of examples of projects you've worked on?
Sure. There are some great things happening around Connecticut. This work seems to come in waves from the bicentennial to the present. At Capital Community College, students and faculty realized that their campus is across the street from a historic Black church, the church that is now Faith Congregational Church in Hartford. Hundreds of years old. And people walked past it every day with no sense of that history and all that that spot, that parking lot, meant to Black Hartford. And they were able to create sort of a curriculum project to work with students to do research, to imagine memorials, to come up with an exhibition, create new work inspired by it, so some poetry, other pieces that really tell that story, to talk to folks at the church, current worshipers at Faith about that history, and to really create an impressive curriculum project around that history that even includes a lectureship, sort of a fancy lectureship honoring James Pennington, who was the pastor of that church and recently received his Yale degree. Long dead now, of course, but he had been a student, and that's in quotes, at Yale Divinity School, but not allowed to speak or be recognized, though he was in the class for a time, and recently was actually given his due as a student with a degree. So lectureship named for James Pennington, and creating this moment to celebrate this history that is adjacent to the campus, but that meant so much to Black Hartford and to Connecticut at that time in the, I guess it would have been the federal era of the state's history. And it's a great memorial, and it's a great opportunity to think about what more we could do to make sure that history isn't lost to us, and to celebrate the other folks who are part of that community, whose names we know and who did so much to push it along, but who don't have any kinds of public recognition in downtown Hartford.
So is there a memorial that is permanent there now?
There is not really. There's an exhibit, and the exhibit builds on a work by an artist for an earlier anniversary for the church. Mel Chin did a wonderful piece, I believe, called Ghost Church, and it was a projection onto that parking garage that reminded people that that church had been there. And so there were several attempts to find a way to create something permanent, and the challenge continues. But this exhibit and this larger curriculum project and all the work that students and faculty have committed to this almost certainly means that there will be something permanent ultimately for that story.
Wonderful. Wonderful story. We heard from the Choate student John Reach in our story. We're going to listen now to the poem that he wrote on what it means to recover this history.
All right. This is a poem called Dusting the Bricks of Time, which I wrote largely in response to my research in middle school with the Witness Stones Project on Lettice Bailey. A quill breaks through the surface of ink, like a stone half dipped into shadow. The unknown is called back. Our fingers trace the bricks of the past, the edges rough from years of wear. They are filled with an unquenched coldness, covered in a layer of dust. A promise forgotten, wrongs forgotten, what else? The feather races through the air, stirring up the old, which it sets to rest in ink. Records merge into a song, sad but full of truth. and promise and failure. Our silence for years has frayed the edges of the page, yet there remains hope somewhere between the threads of existence and silence. Truth. A moon defined by purpose sails the sky. Significance relies on who is looking, listening, caring. I am a speck in the eye of chaos, alive with a hope that knowing the unknown is possible, essential. The letters flow out across the Pacific moonlight, through the doors of time. Our forgotten are to be remembered. They are eternal in time and history, but only if there is history. I pick up a pen. An unending journey rises from the resting dust.
So we've heard from students at Choate. We know that Yale University has had a slavery research project that's gone on for a while, and they've published a book about it. Do you want to address the way some of these privileged institutions are reflecting on the past and what it means for their futures and their connections to other communities in Connecticut?
It is a good thing. It is everybody's history. Everybody has a place in it, and it's exciting to see all kinds of institutions wrestling with where they fit into the story and how they can recognize that story, how they can celebrate the parts that are good and do some work around the things that aren't as good. I'm looking forward to the point at which people are doing this work together. And when students at the community college are working with students at the private institution, and in some cases they are, to do this work and do the research and create something together and tell the story, sharing their experiences, because I do feel like it's one thing to do it on your own in your own silo, but it really, you're getting to the next level when students with different experiences, with different understandings of privilege and identity, urban, suburban, rural, all of that, begin to tell these stories and research these stories together across those boundaries.
We're going to have to wrap it up here. I hope this is the first step in a much larger conversation. Thanks, Frank, for being my partner on this podcast journey.
Sure, it's my pleasure.
Thanks for listening. I'm reporter-producer Diane Orson. Frank Mitchell is our consulting editor. Eric Ossen is our executive editor. The senior director of storytelling is Katie Tolarski, and Cassandra Basler is our podcast producer. Special thanks to Julianne Veracci, senior director of visuals, and Mark Mirko, Ayanna Brown, Ryan Karen King, Dave Wurtzel, and Sam Hockaday, as well as Sabrina Herrera and Francesca Fontanez. Editing help from Patrick Scahill, Erica McIntosh, and Meg Dalton. Vanessa De La Torre is our Chief Content Officer. Our theme music is The Pleasures of Solitude from a manuscript with compositions by Sonny Freeman. Visit ctpublic.org/unforgotten to learn more about the project, including more photos and videos. Unforgotten is a production of Connecticut Public.